everybody, this is Miss Bufford, and in this video, we're going to talk about the difference between intensive and extensive properties. So your learning goal here is to be able to explain if a property is intensive or extensive. So we're going to start by talking about what an intensive property is. So these types of properties are intrinsic to the substance itself, meaning that they're just a natural characteristic of being that substance. So intensive properties do not depend on the amount of substance present. No matter how much or how little you have, that substance will exhibit that property. And they don't change under varying conditions. Because these properties are a natural characteristic of the substances that have them, then they can be used as a means for helping to identify that particular substance. So here are some examples of intensive properties. Anything listed on this table right here is an intensive property, meaning it doesn't matter how much or how little of a substance we have, they're going to exhibit these properties. So, for example, if I have a magnet and I cut my magnet in half, it's still going to be magnetic. Flammability is, for example, if I have a drop of gasoline versus a gallon of gasoline, they're both flammable. Yes, one will produce a larger flame because I have a larger quantity of gas, but the flammability itself is an intensive property because no matter how much I have, it's still going to be flammable. Density is an intensive property because that is just describing the amount of matter per unit of volume. And if you are that substance, at every specific temperature and pressure, you're going to exhibit the same density. And the same with freezing, melting, and boiling point. At every given temperature and pressure, you're going to have a very specific boiling point, melting point, and freezing point. So it doesn't matter how much there is, this property is something that substance will have as just part of, the identity of that substance. So now let's talk about extensive properties. These types of properties are not intrinsic or not part of the identity of a substance. They do depend on the amount of substance present, and these types of properties can change under changing conditions. Because extensive properties experience a change in sample size or under certain conditions, they are generally not useful for identifying substances. So some examples of extensive properties would be things like length, volume, mass, the amount of a substance, which we'll talk about what this means later on this year. That's a mole, it's how we measure the amount of a substance. Size, weight, energy, surface area, or heat capacity. Any of these will definitely be impacted by the sample size that you have. So if I have my silly putty, I've got 5 grams of it. If I cut my silly putty in half, then I only have 2.5 grams. Okay, so mass is going to be an extensive property. So let's talk about how I can tell if a property is intensive or extensive if I don't have that list in front of me showing me which one is which. If altering the sample size changes the value of that property, then that property is going to be extensive. For example, if I have my 5 grams of silly putty and I cut it into 2 equal pieces and I give one to a friend, and I only have 2.5 grams of my green silly putty left, and that is half of the mass that I originally had started with, so that means that mass is extensive. If altering the sample size of the sample does not change the value of that property, then it is intensive. So for example, I have that same 5 grams of silly putty and I cut it into 2 equal pieces and give one to a friend. The silly putty is still green, so color is an intensive property. It didn't change when I changed my sample size. I hope this video was helpful. If you have any questions, feel free to send me a message through It's Learning or email. Thanks for watching Bufford Chemistry. Subscribe to my YouTube channel for more chemistry help.